fifth graders, this video is all about subtracting mixed numbers when we need to do some regrouping. And just like with whole number subtraction problems, sometimes we have to regroup in a fraction subtraction problem as well. So the setup for this is exactly the same as any other mixed number addition or subtraction question. So let's look at the example 3 2/5 minus 1 2/4. Just like any other mixed number problem, I'm going to start by rewriting my fractions vertically and sliding my whole numbers over to hold those place value positions. So I'll rewrite 3 2/5 minus 1 2/4, and I'll slide over the whole numbers 3 and 1. Next, I'll rename my fractions as equivalent fractions with common denominators. So I remember that the common denominator between 5 and 4 is 20. So 2/5 meant I needed to multiply 5 times 4 and 2 times 4 for an equivalent fraction of 8/20. And in 2/4, I multiplied 4 times 5 and 2 times 5 for an equivalent fraction of 10/20. Now I'm going to add or subtract the fractions. And here's where we have to do something a little different. You might see right away in your fraction column that you have more 20ths pieces on the bottom than you do on the top. When you have a greater number of 20ths pieces on the bottom, or a greater number of any fraction on the bottom, you need to regroup. And that signal is exactly the same as it is with whole numbers. With whole numbers, we moved to the place value position to the left. So we can do that with fractions. That just means we're going to need to borrow or regroup from the ones place. In this case, I'll need to borrow from the 3. So just like with whole numbers, I'll cross out the 3 and I'll turn it into a 2 because I'm borrowing one whole. Now, since I borrowed one whole, it's important to remember what makes up one whole when we're talking about fractions. We know that the denominator of a fraction tells us how many pieces make up one whole. So since we borrowed 1 from our ones place, that really means we borrowed 20 little pieces. So in other words, I need to add another 20 pieces to the 8 that I already have, because borrowing one whole means borrowing 20 little slivers. Now I can look at this fraction as 28/20, the 8 that I had to start, and the 20 more pieces from that whole number that I borrowed from the ones place. 28 minus 10 is 18/20. And finally, I can move on to my last step, which is to subtract the whole numbers. 2 minus 1 is 1, so that means my final difference is 1 18/20. Of course, if the question asks you to, don't forget about checking for simplest form. I could also rewrite this difference as 1 9/10. Let's take a look at a couple more subtraction with regrouping questions. All right, so let's take a look at some more examples of subtraction with renaming. And believe it or not, these are some of my favorite questions to do because I like the added challenge of them. So when I have 5 1/3 minus 3 1/2, you won't or might not necessarily realize right away if you're going to need renaming. So you'll start the process just like a regular mixed number subtraction problem. I'll line them up vertically. Oops, minus 3 1/2. I'll make my equivalent fractions after I bring over my whole numbers. So 5 minus 3. My equivalent fractions, I know that I'm going to need a common denominator of 6. So 1/3 becomes 6 by multiplying by 2. And 1/2 becomes 6 by multiplying by 3. So now here's where your brain should hopefully start to send off some alarm bells and say, wait a second, I can't subtract 3 things when I only have 2 things. In other words, if I have 2 orange 1/6 tiles, I can't take away 3 of those tiles because I only have 2 of them. So what I need to do is I need to regroup or borrow from the 5. So just like with whole numbers, I'll cross that out and borrow one whole. So that 5 becomes a 4. Now, when I make one whole, It's made up of 6 different orange 1/6 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when we are renaming or regrouping with our fractions, what we really just did was we took that one whole that we borrowed and we turned it into 6 extra 1/6 tiles. So that means I need to add 6 extra tiles to the 2 1/6 pieces I already had. So if you wanted to rewrite this, you could rewrite this as 4 and 8/6. It's going to be an improper fraction, and that's okay because that's what's going to allow us to subtract away the 3/6. So now I can do 8/6 minus 3/6 is 5/6, and 4 minus 3 is 1. So when we regroup, the most important thing to remember is that the amount we're adding is based on the denominator. Now let's take a look at a different type. This time I have 7 minus 2 and 2/3. So I'm going to have 7 here minus 2 and 2/3. Now, when I bring this over, I bring over the whole number 7 minus the 2, and I could really rewrite the 2/3 again because I don't have to worry about a common denominator when I only have one fraction. That already is the denominator that I need. But here's where 5th graders make a mistake. My favorite wrong answer is when 5th graders just say, oh, that means that I'm going to have 2/3 down here. That's not actually true because what you're doing is you're really subtracting 2/3 away from 0. So what I would suggest is as a placeholder, next to the 7 or whatever your whole number is, write the fraction 0/3 or 0 over whatever your denominator is. Now when you look at this, you'll say, wait a second, I can't take 2/3 away if I don't have any thirds. So that way you know you need to regroup. So the 7 becomes a 6, and now I'm going to add 3 pieces because in this particular fraction, it takes 3 pieces to make up one whole. So this is like saying 6 and 3/3 minus 2 and 2/3. And if you think about it, 6 and 3/3 is like saying 6 and 1 extra, which is the original number 7 that we had. So now 3/3 minus 2/3 is 1/3, and 6 minus 2 is 4. So my final difference is 4 and 1/3. Let's take a look at one more with a whole number like that so that we can really get that thinking solid. So let's look at 10 minus 5 and 3/4. Again, I'll rewrite 10 minus 5 and 3/4 vertically. I'll bring over my whole numbers, 10 and 5, and I can write 3/4 in my fraction column. Now, to hold the place of the fact that this has no fractional amounts, I'll say 10 and 0/4, which allows me to recognize I need to regroup. So I'll cross out the 10 and make it a 9. And then because it takes 4 pieces to make up one whole, that one whole that I borrowed adds me 4 pieces here. So I could rewrite this as 9 and 4/4 minus 5 and 3/4. Now I can subtract my fractional pieces. 4/4 minus 3/4 is 1/4, and 9 minus 5 is 4, for a difference of 4 and 1/4. So be on the lookout for questions where you need to regroup. The most important thing to remember is whether you're regrouping with just a whole number or you're regrouping from a fraction, the number of pieces you add is determined by your denominator. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to do more of these practice questions with you.